My name is Catherine, and joining us on the panel today, we have a wonderful lineup of people. We have Jill from Automatic, we have Henny and Naz from Grab, Sigit from Shopify, and Christine also from Shopify. So thank you all for your patience and for your time on everything. We'll start off by introducing you, but I'll introduce the panel first. The topic of today is best practice, and best practice means a lot to different people, to different teams, and to different organizations. What works for one company, whether you're a small startup or might not work for an enterprise. And so the goal today is to hear the thoughts of the teams here, to find out what has worked for them. Can it be applicable to you, the audience, and give you some thought to think about? We have companies that are renowned like Netflix or Shopify in Europe as being global best practice, but in reality, does that work for you? So we're hoping the insights from the team today will really help you figure that out. And I'll get the team to give a short introduction to themselves first. I'll list you off. So Jill, I'll ask you to say hi, who you are and a little bit about you.
Sure. So hi, I'm Jill. I'm a senior product designer at Automatic, working on WooCommerce, which is the e-commerce product on WordPress.
Great. And Christine?
Hi, everyone. I'm China User Research Lead in Shopify.
Great. And Henny?
Hi, I'm Henny. I'm a research ops at Grab from the Design Strategy and Research team.
Great. And Sigit?
Hi, I'm Sigit. I'm the senior product designer in the Money and Channels team at Shopify.
Great. And Naz?
Hey there, my name is Naz. I'm from the Design Strategy and Research team at Grab.
Great. And yet all of the team have a different background for everything from research ops to product design. So we'll start off with Jill, if that's okay, just to talk about your team split. We're going to talk about 3 different areas so far. So team structure, productivity, and recruitment. So each of the team will talk briefly on their team structure. So Jill, you've quite an interesting team split. Could you describe how it's made up?
So one thing to remember about Automatic, which is pretty unique, is that it is a globally distributed team. So it has been globally distributed for the last 15 years. So there is no like office anywhere in the world. So that definitely informs a little bit about how we work. So our product teams typically include a product manager, a designer, and maybe like 5 to 10 developers. It really varies across the teams. And a lot of the teams are given a high level of autonomy to operate in the way that they see best. Again, given the very distributed nature of the company, that autonomy is somewhat necessary. So yeah, that's sort of a breakdown of how the teams are structured.
Great. And what's the dev? You have quite a high dev ratio.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might partly be due to the fact that WordPress as a platform is very developer centric. So I think for a lot of the products that we handle, that input and that leadership from the developers in our organization is also extremely important. Additionally, the developers are expected to take on to wear a lot of different hats. So they are kind of expected to be fairly proficient in design and product as well. And I think they are very much empowered to take on those roles and explore those roles, even as developers.
Yeah, brilliant. And Christine, if you could talk a little bit about Shopify's structure. You've started off. You already have a remote by design approach. Can you tell for those who don't know what that structure is like and team globally?
Yeah, so Shopify since last year become a digital by default company. So by saying digital by default, which were remote teams. And then last year we have a big reorg. So after that reorg, all the teams globally structured by its function. So for example, Sigit, he is in the core. So core is the core product for Shopify. So that's his one group. And the other group, like myself, is at a growth. So growth focus on the top of funnel. That's another like big work group. So inside of each work groups, we have UX divisions and R&D divisions. However, inside of the big group, I think because we are a remote company, the whole structure is more driven by mission. So everybody inside of that big group actually is driven by its mission of that group. Like my group growth is to increase active merchants. So that is our mission. Therefore, the people inside of that will divide into smaller product teams or project teams. We work pretty collaboratively. Each smaller group will have a product, PM, as well as a UX designer or a UX lead, as well as researchers. Will also partner with everybody around the world. So that's our structure.
Yeah, great. And Sigit, do you have anything to add on that? Just how does it work for you and your team?
Yeah, so as Christian mentioned, we are a very globally distributed team with our own mission. Also, we are unified with a whole Shopify mission. There's a high degree of autonomy as well. And I think with every, because we're naturally distributed geographically, there's a lot of emphasis on being in that specific geography. So we have a really importance, we put high importance in like putting local lens into our product. So for example, if we are located in Asia, we are naturally mandated to contribute to define the direction of the product in terms of the local markets, for example. So that's also part why we are interested in this kind of topic as well.
Great. And I'll move on to Henny, still talking on the team structure. So your team, and Nazal, I will follow up with you on this, but the team is mainly based out of Singapore, but could you share with the audience more on the team structure and how that's worked? Because that's quite different with your pods. That's for you, Henny, but Naz will jump in if not.
Okay, maybe I can try to explain a bit more. So right now in our teams, we have different pods working for which each specialty. So there are pods with there are specialty specialized in merchants and specialized in deliveries, and also specialize in deliveries also in food. So maybe Nas can explain more about the team structure, but I will explain more about what the research ops are working on. So research ops actually work across these pods in our teams. So we support each pods and making sure that we achieve efficient in the research operations.
Great. And yeah, Naz, can you talk more on the pods and then a follow up with the business priorities as well of how that works?
Sure. So I think our team is primarily based in Singapore and Indonesia. So we're across 2 countries, but we're serving Southeast Asia. So we are quite centralized as a team, more or less, between Singapore and Indonesia. We have divided ourselves into 4 pods. This is what's working right now. No one is to say, hey, this is how it should be or how it ought to be before, how it will be. But today, that's what works for us. So one pod has about 4 to 5 researchers, 3 to 5, around there. One of them will focus on financial services right now. So all the business verticals that have to do with financial experiences like GrabPay, insurance, wealth, investments. So the researchers in this pod can synergize across those business verticals, do the research and connect the dots about the users in a way that, and connect with the stakeholders that cut across all those different verticals. Then that's a pod based on business verticals. We have another pod focused on merchants as a user group. Why? Because we thought it wasn't efficient to have one researcher focusing on Grab food merchants, another researcher doing GrabPay merchants, another researcher doing like deliveries merchants or advertising. So hey, why not we have a one pod where we're all together and we're studying the same guy. It's the same merchant who's using all these services, and we're in a unique position to connect the dots because we don't want to expose our organizational structure to the users at the end of the day. And that's what this pod is about harmonizing those insights and then translating that across the different verticals. And so that's how, so we have like two more pods. One is more, we call it the central pod, focusing on cross-business topics like customer retention. It doesn't matter what business it is. We have so many businesses, but that's a larger topic that applies across engagement, right? How do we promote engagement? And then one pod will be about maybe food and maybe customer support. But how we, those business focuses may change. But the point is we have pods and then we reevaluate. Is this still the right focus? Should we still be focusing on these areas as a team of researchers? Because the world isn't static, neither is the company. And so we adapt with that through our research structure.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting way to work, which is there must be difficulty in aligning the business and the team at points, or does anyone else? Jill, how do you work on business and team alignment, particularly having so many developers?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I definitely think that, you know, in order to make sure that your business goals and your product focuses are in alignment, I do think that ultimately, this is a bit of a standard answer, I guess, but it is true that I think ultimately both need to be focused on the customer, both need to really get a lot of input and a lot of feedback and listen really closely to what your users are saying. And I think that if both the business focuses and the product orgs can do that, then hopefully they would all be in alignment. I guess that's in an ideal world.
That's the dream. And Christine, I guess moving on to from alignment and the team to more on productivity. How do you've worked in the past for quite a number of companies, you've set up your own accelerator. How do you balance the Shopify process, which is quite flexible with quite a rigid background? Do you struggle with it, or do you embrace it?
I think I have to be honest, at the beginning, there definitely would be struggle because originally we're not a remote company, but since last year, everybody is forced to work at home. And then gradually we become a digital by default company. So the first struggle is there is no work and life boundary. As everybody experienced. And secondly, like right now, because our team is more structured at its the parts of the funnel, like my team, actually the people closely work with me, they're in Canada, and then I'm in Taiwan. And then there are also people in New Zealand I need to work with, also people in Singapore. So basically there's no like, okay, I start my day from 9 to 6. It's more like through the day, I'm like separating time to talk to different people around the world. So I think there will be the struggle. I think in terms of how we restructure our life, I feel like in this kind of setting, the way to keep people to be productive has to be mission driven and then outcome driven instead of time driven or efficiency driven. And then Shopify actually provides a very good system to keep people feel curious and also feel motivated by themselves. Therefore, we actually are like very self-driven to do good work. And then I think that's how the company keep moving in a very like nice and efficient way.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And if anyone, just a quick stop, if anyone has any questions for the audience, please do ask on the Slack channel, Ask the Speakers. So please join there. You would have received the links in your emails. Yeah, it was really a tricky one. And Sigurd, how do you find it? Because Christine talked about setting up calls at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. and it's quite challenging. You know, you have to. It can lend itself to a certain personality type. How do you find it?
So I think communication is definitely a challenge now that we are all remote, even in the same country or the same time zone. But we've been thriving on asynchronous communication. So what that means is that, of course, we do meetings and other synchronous communications. But I think since I joined, actually, I spend more time like documenting things, writing things down rather than designing for me. So I think it's important to build alignment through this form of like asynchronous communication, either this through like a document writing or video demonstration, for example. So that helps a lot, like build context with people, especially in like a difficult time zone from us. And it maintains a lot of trust. And also, if you see productivity as in like making sure people are working, then I think that's one way to solve it. But I think the way we measure productivity is more around like what the outcomes are, like Christine said, and that outcomes are centered around like merchant value, what kind of value that we are going to bring to the merchants, who are the users we ultimately serve.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Look, how do you look at that? Like, if the company is focused on the outcomes versus anything else in particular, not so much on the features. Jill, do you have anything to add on that with how your team at Automatic works?
I just wanted to echo, what we've been saying about like asynchronous communication and writing things down as part of your process as well, and it being like a very integral part to product development for distributed teams. But I guess for a lot of teams, because of COVID, I definitely empathize with that feeling of like writing more than designing. But yeah, Automatic, as I mentioned before, having been distributed for 15 years, definitely has built a culture around this kind of asynchronous communication. So interestingly, and I was mentioning this to Catherine before, but interestingly, the vast majority of our interview processes and our hiring process is actually just through writing. So like some of my colleagues mentioned that like they actually like they went through the entire interview process, they were hired, they joined the company, and then like 2 months later they spoke to somebody with like their mouths. Like through the entire process, they were just writing and chatting and writing and chatting. And it's really a very intentional process that has been designed to prioritize that kind of communication and to make sure that you are comfortable communicating in that way, even as you are, developing products and ideating on features and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I will throw this out to either Christine or Sigurd or Naz and Henny, and I shouldn't do that, but I will in this instance. That I can't imagine hiring and not speaking to somebody at all, and going through that process. I'll start with Sigurd, if that's okay. Would you be comfortable with that at Shopify, hiring anybody?
I cannot really say that on behalf of Shopify, but if I were the one who is hiring, maybe not 100% yet. I know like probably some companies do that, like Automatic. But I think there are like some nuances that we need to get from like real life conversations. But I think it all depends on what the company is. I mean, if they value thinking more than like other maybe like more verbally speaking skills, or maybe like because they are naturally distributed teams, so they want to make sure that people can document their writing, then I think it's, in all fairness, I mean, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and I guess Naz, what was the hiring process like? What is the hiring process at Grab?
We do Zoom calls.
Prior to the C word.
Pretty yeah, quite, I mean, quite traditional. Well, prior to that, of course, we'd meet in person, so that maybe 2 or 3 rounds, and when we bring people in and have a conversation. You know, that each round is about different components you care about. One might be, hey, first of all, do you have the skills and the interest for the role? Then we really have a focus on culture. What is your you know, what are your cultural values, and, you know, in terms of feedback and hunger, and, you know, your drive, and various components. So it was always in person, but after that we just switched to Zoom. Very traditional, just like flip from in-person interviews to Zoom interviews. Nothing too radical.
No, it's very interesting. And so to summarize the 2 approaches in particular at Automatic and Shopify. So Automatic, both companies are very autonomous driven. So you put a lot of ownership on the teams, if I am correct in saying, and the individual, but in 2 very different ways. Do you think, Christine, that you have got better personality types because of the way that you hire people? Of course, Sigurt's laughing and saying, yes, of course we do. But does it lend itself? What is the retention rate like? What is the outcome? How fast do you release at Shopify?
You mean how fast what do you mean by how fast we release?
How fast do you release? Yeah, sorry. In terms of your products and your features, how fast would the developer team, and I know it's not your particular area, but how fast would you get your product out there and your updates? Okay,
so because it actually varies, so I can answer, and then Sigurd probably will have a different answer, because my product is in growth. So growth product, by its natural, we want to run like quicker sprints. Therefore, we do a lot of experiment. And then from the experiment, we go to the next stage. So in a way, we release pretty quickly. So usually for one MVP, it could take, for example, like 1 month or like a couple of weeks to release. But if it's a brochure or so it's just web design, and then we can do quick change. You can release over like in a week or over a couple of days as well. But however, we always do A/B test. Therefore, it's not released to the mass market. We'll separate a specific target and then match that with our data to run the test, and then gradually enlarge the pool to the audience and to the market.
Great. Sigurd, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the teams inside Shopify. Some teams ship faster than the other teams. I think it depends on the scale and the level of the product as well. But generally speaking, I think outside of like being outcomes driven, we are also trying to ship things like in due time. So we are not really a truly waterfall company where it like you can drag along and learn later. So we prefer like ship something now and learn now, even though like the shipping it means like learning. So I think it's better to at least learn something from it, even though it's just research, for example. So
yeah, that's interesting. And Jill, I'm going to ask you about a tough question. You've worked for both Automatic and Zendesk, 2 very different processes. So Zendesk would have a lower ratio of designers to developers versus Automatic, if I'm correct. First question is, does Automatic, are they design driven if they've got so many developers? And how does that work? And the second one would be, which would be your favorite to work for? But which process, but at Automatic, would they have a design head on them, or how does that work when you've got such a large developer ratio? A lot of people would argue that it's not ideal.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that that is an interesting question, particularly as a designer. You do think about, like, is our product design driven? Which I think is a very, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of like a kind of a self-serving perspective to take, I feel, particularly if you're a designer or you're in the design team. And I do think that it's true that if you just have a lower percentage of designers, your products may naturally become less design driven, if you define that as like designers kind of taking the lead in certain things. I would say, I think as kind of I mentioned briefly before, I do think that we have a lot of developers who really are very passionate about UX. And I think I've seen that maybe more often at Automatic compared to Zendesk, though not that the Zendesk developers are not passionate about user experience, but I think in Automatic, they sort of have to be, because they really may not have a designer working with them at all. So I think they're very much empowered and free to like explore their interest in UI UX. So I think you do see a lot more developers who are kind of wearing all the hats at once, just because there maybe isn't even a design resource for them to even talk to. So in terms of your second question on which do I prefer, okay, this is like, I guess this is a bit of a cop out, but I mean, both really have their pros and cons. I think when you have a very big and influential design team, you definitely have opportunities that you may not have in another company as a design org. And additionally, you can learn from so many more people, you know, just because your design team is just bigger and maybe more mature. But when you're in like kind of a scrappier environment like Automatic is, even though it is a fairly, you know, it's not a new company, but it still maintains that kind of very scrappy, self-driven kind of environment for everyone in the product development process. I definitely think that that kind of autonomy to explore different things and to try out, you know, different roles that you may not have been able to try out different areas of the product development process is super cool as well. So yeah, I like both.
Yeah, that's an absolute fair answer, and probably a good one publicly. Naz, I'll ask you just regarding Grab and the team and the pods. How have you found the release times there? Is it faster than other places you've worked, or better or worse, or just different?
I would echo what I think the others have said about how the shipping time really depends on each product and how it's scoped, the engineering effort that it's involved. Similarly, we do experiments, a lot of experiments prior to releasing. We release to different cohorts as well, A/B tests, to ensure that there's no negative consequence, or it's not affecting the experience in any in a way that doesn't work within our targets or metrics. So, and some efforts are broken up across quarters, some are faster to ship. So I think as a research team, we are primarily working with designers and the PMs, a little less with the engineers. The engineers work with us insofar as we invite them to be a part of our research and workshops, to collaborate on ideating the ideas, to be able to see the customer problems, rally around those problems, and brainstorm how to approach them. This with engineering constraints and with the business constraints. The content strategists will be there, designers will be there. So we're all in the same space, doing that research together to find a way forward. And then from there, what comes out of that, what features, what product ideas, that goes down the pipeline. And we're not, you know, and that those timings are very varied, I think, I would say, based on the feature.
Yeah, no, great. And I'll circle back, Henny, to on productivity and everything. You've worked at very traditional research organizations outside of the tech industry up until now. How do you find the pace at Grab and the workflow in terms of deep focus and deep thought versus being almost in a virtual open plan setting?
Yeah, actually, if I compare to my previous my previous companies, it's quite different from Grab actually. So as Anas mentioned before, I'm in Jakarta and Anas is based in Singapore. So we are based in different countries. And how do we still communicate with each others and make sure that we align on our goals and things other than that. So it will be probably the most interesting experience I had by working in Grab, because I learned that the cultures is very supportive. We are as a teams, we support each others, and like we learn from each others, and it's quite an interesting way for me to grow.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and it is a good point. It's all about it is about growth. Sigurd, you're on the Slack channel, and I wanted you to clarify or go into a little bit more detail on the question that Rory asked, which was what tools do you use to track your experiments and cohorts? So you have your own internal tool. Could you explain why you went down that approach?
So in terms of the reason why we use internal tool, I think it's been like going on for a few years, even before I joined. So I couldn't say the reason for that, but I think, yes, we do use a couple of internal tools that I believe we use ourselves. We build ourselves, I mean. And I think that helps us to make sure that the tools that we use conform to how we do things, and also conform to the purpose that we want to use it for. We also use like third-party tools, but I feel like we use the best of both worlds, I think. So I think it depends on the use case as well.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. And both, I guess, at Grab and Automatic, do you have any tools that you use, or are they internally created? Like, as in to track your experiments, apologies. Is there tools that you use internally that you've built, or is there any tools that you use to track your experiments that work and your team processes?
Yeah, similar to what you mentioned at Shopify. At Grab, we have our own internal tool to run and track experiments that everyone can tap on. So it's it's accessible Grab-wide to any PM to use.
Yeah, great. And I will go on to you, Christine. There's a question on burnout. Is there a risk of your team getting burnout with the always on mentality?
I have to be honest, potentially yes. But I think in a way,
I think Christine has frozen.
Because I felt.
Sorry, Christine, I don't know whether it was on your end, or our end, but if you could just repeat the question, because it froze there for a second.
Okay, how's that? Is it
Perfect.
Working now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's a potential to be burnout, but the pressure comes from ourselves because our work is very self-driven. However, our Shopify is very famous for like doing less and choose the work which is to be impactful. Therefore, we don't have to always working or work a lot to prove ourselves to be valuable, but to choose things that we feel most meaningful for ourselves as well as for the company growth. Therefore, in a way, we don't have to be burnout as long as we find a way to schedule our own life. Because in a way, nobody would force you to join 11 o'clock p.m. Meeting unless you want. You could be creative to create a sync way to communicate with other members. It's really back to your own hands. Therefore, if one person like myself, sometimes I feel nervous or feel burnout, I realize the pressure is actually come from myself. And then in a way, I can train myself to be a better person, to control my own time, and then to cultivate the relationship that I felt actually is important to me.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and it goes down to autonomy for the individual. Like I've worked, and I've mentioned this on the call, like for example, Jovi on the team, I would imagine very self-driven and self-motivated. She takes on a lot of challenges and runs with it. But there are other people, not on my team, just to clarify, because all of our team are wonderful. But there are other people I've worked with in the past, for example, that need that structure. And they need, and they won't thrive in that same environment. And are you missing out on that person because they also have value to add, as well as somebody who's self-driven? Both Naz and Jill are nodding furiously. So I'll go at Naz first. What would you think on that topic or comment?
Yeah, I was just nodding because it's an interesting question, because once the pandemic started, and work and life started blending in ways that many of us were not used to, there was a lot to adapt to. I think what I appreciated, that the Grab team, the people operations team, they sent us a guide on how to hold a conversation about how to communicate with your team members. So they encouraged us to meet and talk about what are best ways to communicate with you. What are hours that work with you? What are some of your needs that maybe you have kids and you absolutely need to be off from 5 p.m. and maybe you'll come back at 10. How fast is your response time? What to really set expectations and boundaries with one another, and having that conversation. I mean, it seemed like, okay, we'll just have a conversation and talk about it, but it sensitizes us to one another a little bit more. It creates a bit more empathy for what everyone's going through. So that I think helps a little bit with managing something like burnout, because we don't expect people to be pinging you in the evening or night unless there's unless there's a certain scenario that comes up. Right. So I do personally value the ability to switch off. And I think everyone should have that space to be able to do so. And how do we ensure that's possible? How do we ensure bandwidth? How do you set boundaries? And how can, as a leader of a team, how do you help everyone else understand that it's okay to set boundaries as well? And so that's how we cope through it. And I think the thing about being in research is sometimes you can't get out of your research mode. You're just in it. You're in the field. You're doing interviews end to end. You're analyzing it. You're writing a report, and then you're presenting, and you have to get it done by then. So there are peak moments, and there also recognize and give yourself the off-peak moment, right? Acknowledge it for what it is, and speak up when it's not working well, and see what we can do to negotiate what's on your plate. So that's my take on it. Yeah, I feel like there is a lot of sense. I think it is a good topic. So I was like, yeah, I was very keen to hear from Christine. I think you're right. You said it for yourself, but it's also about how you set that with one another as well, because we do work together, whether it's asynchronously or not, right?
Yeah. Sorry, Christine, I was just going to say, continue.
Sorry. Yeah, I just feel it's a very interesting topic, because last time, since you mentioned about structure, and then I keep asking myself, what does it mean? So I feel like in a remote setting, structure needs to be redefined, because we used to be, the old structure is very hierarchical in lots of big corporates. So people know when to go to work, who is around them, what to do. But if you deconstruct that concept, the structure actually defines by, hey, everybody knows their mission and their objective, so they know where to go, what to do. Then the other layer actually is who is around you. So our structure is defined by the people around us. So therefore, Shopify, although it seems doesn't have very strong structure, however, we still have a clear definition of the people around us. And then even give you the freedom that encourage you to build your own network and circle and to charge the trust battery with the people around you. Therefore, actually, it's a stronger network in a way. Then the third thing inside of structure is like your everyday life. Therefore, for a remote company, it's very important to set up the rituals. The rituals actually will help your employees to define their everyday life. Therefore, back to your question, will a person who really needs a structure feel lost at joining after he or she joined Shopify? I don't think so. But however, there definitely will be time that he or she need to readjust. But the company does do a very good job at creating that virtual structure to support all the people work inside.
Yeah, it is. You could talk about it. It would be interesting to hear what the audience feels as well on an individual basis of what their personality types are like, and if that lends themselves to a specific company and that they would thrive in. I think it's worth noting for future of growth. But I guess with that, because we do have to wrap up shortly, I wanted to ask each person what would be a company that they would admire from a team outside of their own, from a team and culture and productivity and product perspective, and briefly on why. Christine, I'll ask you first if you have any thoughts.
Of course, I would say Shopify would be a company I feel admire. But actually, to be fair, I admire all the companies like still alive and then be really positive and try to create impact to the society. The companies that I will admire will be the ones that has a very clear mission and then be really honest to the mission and to what it wants to do. Because I think company, it actually is a business. So the business is to make money. However, you can choose the way to make money. And also, it also relates to all the people working inside of a company, because it keeps us to get salary. Therefore, we can support our own family. However, the way they treat their people actually will impact thousands' life. So in a way, I do admire Shopify, because I actually feel quite happy after I joined, and I felt inspired every day. And then when I think about Monday, I don't feel sad. Actually, I feel quite excited because there are new questions for me to solve and new things for me to learn.
I think that's really valuable. I think the mission, what you said, I think is really a strong point. And then the final for both the individual and the team. And on a team, on an individual level, I think going to work every day happy is really lovely. But one thing I'd add is that it's up to the individual as well to say if they're not happy and to be that change rather than hoping that the company will change for them. Too often you see people sitting and they don't do anything about it. But I think, yeah, more companies are, I don't know what other people think on that, but more companies are leaning towards that mission approach, and whether that be trying to do better for the environment, whilst obviously making business benefit and revenue, as you pointed out, Christine. Jill, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Actually, like one thing that came to my mind when you asked it was, I think when you and I were chatting before this, and you were mentioning that like you want to build a community of I think you mentioned like kindness. I do think that that is a value that I connect very strongly with across like different teams and different organizations. I feel like it's very clear when that is a value of the team or the leadership, kindness and respect towards one another. I feel like that's something that I always like.
I like it. Does anyone have any companies? Because I that actually align with these missions, that because they are all really great. And the answer can be no if it's not out there yet. I do think that there are companies that are evolving into this. You hear more talks on thinking about the longer term. So building a bit. Shopify, I believe your founder, he's a designer and he thinks about the next 100 years, if I'm correct, not just in the moment. Could you maybe talk more on that, maybe Sigurd?
Yeah, so I think Shopify is committed to be a 100-year company. So what that means is that it does so by building a sustainable business, I think. And with regards to your question, like what kind of like process, product, or company that is ideal, I think this is one of them. And in a way that I think if I would summarize it, a company or a product should care about the people. You can say people by being the customers or maybe like people who work inside the company. So by focusing on the people, I think we can be more sustainable, and hence like Shopify's mission to be a 100-year company, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point. We do have to wrap up, but this is the last question because it's from a member of the audience, and I think it's a nice finish because it's based on the Singapore community. It's from Artem, and he says, do you think a vast majority of Singapore software development companies utilize team empowerment and supportive management style, or is it a command and control? So is it this empowerment that you talk, or is it command and control? I think it's a heated question. And maybe Henny or Naz could answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm sufficiently familiar with the vast majority of Singapore software companies, so I will refrain from speaking to that, whether it's supportive management style or command and control. To be honest, I have no idea. Just going to be honest there.
No, that's fine. Christine, did you have thoughts?
I have to say I'm not familiar with all the Singaporean companies, especially the software companies. I can only speak from my past work experience, comparing traditional big corporates experience from myself, as well as, for example, right now, this experience working with Shopify, which is a Canadian-based global software company. Felt traditionally, the last generation, yes, it's more control, and then very like demanding, strict, and then people is in a way they are efficient and great because of that strict organization structure, as well as very strict way of management. So to our boss, we always feel like respect, and then we choose words to speak, and then we need to spend a lot of energy to understand how to live in the corporate politics. However, I think there are more and more software companies in general start by young and ambitious and also inspirational entrepreneurs. And for those companies, a lot of them are software companies. And then I can see for those companies, they actually use a new way to manage the company. So I think in general, it's not like Singaporean company or American company or a Taiwanese company. It's more back to the company itself and the people who started. But just from my personal management experience, I actually believe a mission-driven company and also a company driven by autonomy and also by like the positive energy, and also by like give the power back to all the individuals. Although maybe in the short term it seems kind of scary, and then maybe not as efficient as before, but in the long term, actually it's going to be more profitable, and then can last and more sustainable for longer, like 100 years.
Yeah, and I think that's a really lovely note to end on. Thank you all so much. To the audience, the team have a phenomenal background and are really individually great at their work. So if you do have any questions, please do ask the speakers, and we can forward them on to email and get a response, or they can respond directly to this.